You light our homes. Keep us warm.
You help us explore, innovate, and achieve the unthinkable.
You are everywhere.
Yet, sometimes out of reach.
You move us forward and bring us together.
And together, we're on a journey towards the future of energy.
So what will it look like?
It's hard to say, but we know it will be sustainable and abundant.
We're already on our way.
With a common purpose, each of us playing our part.
At Deloitte, we're connecting every bright mind, every organization, every startup, every innovator.
Every citizen, CEO, and regulator.
Making this future happen won't be easy, so we're developing practical solutions.
And a clear roadmap to help our clients on their way.
We'll keep making those connections
Each step well planned, moving forward together.
to make our new energy future a reality. Let's connect for a new energy future.
floor is yours. Thank you very much. I'd like to start in a way which would touch on the Polish hydrogen strategy. As you may know, one of the most promising sectors which should benefit from hydrogen is industry. Due to obvious reasons, industry requires a lot of energy. It also has its, unfortunately, still negative impact on the environment as far as CO2 emissions. So, in a natural way, it is the industrial sector that should benefit the most from the industry, from the hydrogen transformation. Now, looking at the Polish industry and the fact that hydrogen is nothing all that new to the Polish industry, the question is whether this experience of ours when it comes to hydrogen, can it be translated into the industry benefiting from this hydrogen transformation? Mr. Biedroń, could you respond? Good afternoon. Welcome to all of those who have made it after lunch. Let me put it this way, from the perspective of the oil sector, which I represent now, hydrogen has definitely been with us right from nearly right from the beginning of the oil industry, but even back in the 1920s, we had first processes in which hydrogen, at least in the oil sector, was widely used. From the perspective of today, I hope I won't bore you with this bit of retrospective, but we've also been given some drive by regulations connected with the content of sulfur in fuels. So the limiting of the sulfur content resulted in the oil industry investing, at least in Europe, in desulfurization systems, which is associated with hydrogen, which gets rid of sulfur in oil products. Of course, the economy of oil refineries is also connected with processing the extracted oil as much as possible. I've been raised with the heritage of Gdańsk refinery in my background, so here locally we have certain awareness what to do to invest in this effectiveness, and every phase of this investment was putting yet another piece of the puzzle, for example, hydrogen manufacturing and so on. So hydrogen is nothing all that new. We know how to use it, to put it briefly. Also, for quite a few years, we've been investigating the application of hydrogen as alternative fuel. It's definitely a challenge. However, from the point of view of the organization in which hydrogen production processes have been going on since we can remember, it's somewhat easier. So we do have competences, we have human resources, which allow us to go a step ahead and operate with hydrogen the way we do with other fuels. Of course, it's not easy. Well, as we know, hydrogen infrastructure is most costly than the one for classic fuels. And the current scale and the development of automotive fleet, or rather its lack in Poland, because frankly speaking, there aren't all that many cases of commercial use of hydrogen as fuel in transport in Poland. I think that our expenditures here, the perspective of economic return, which is used to every investment, is somewhat remote. And And I'm certain that regulations or support in terms of co-financing subsidies can definitely help us here. Yes, as far as the refining industry, hydrogen has been used there for years, true. But I'm also curious, what is the outlook of Radosław in the context of KGHM? On one hand, it's a very energy-consuming sector, which I think it could benefit a lot from this hydrogen transformation, especially when it comes to green hydrogen. And I know that it's been nearly nearly for a year, we've had climate strategy in KGHM. So I wonder how this climate strategy in the context of this hydrogen transformation does address the ambitions and challenges in the group. Thank you for the questions. Thank you for the question. True, KGHM last year took this rather ambitious climatic policy. We give ourselves a goal of being climate neutral by 2050 and reducing our emissions 50% out to 2030. We are not doing it because we want to build a good image of the company, which is still important, of course, but we want to join global challenges connected with climate change, obviously. But our main motivation is business. KGHM produces metals which are very important in transformation process. Copper and silver were in the 7th and 2nd place in global production. These are basic materials wherever we deal with energy, be it cables, coils. Silver, for example, is also used very heavily in photovoltaics. So we believe that this transformation is here, and it's going to develop our markets that will increase demand for our materials. And since supply is limited, then this will have a positive impact on the prices of our materials. So it creates a certain potential. If we are serious about this building new green economy, it would be good for these materials to be low carbon emission profile. And these are very concrete steps we are taking to decrease the carbon footprint of our products. We need a huge decarbonization program to do that. We've shown the way of reaching these goals. The general level, true, still, but hydrogen occupies a very important place here because, as it has been mentioned, we do have huge energy needs as far as electric energy. We are the 2nd biggest consumer in the country. We will also rely on fossil fuels if you were to count oil, coal, coke. We have tremendous amounts of energy used by our company every year. These 2 terawatt hours that we use, here we see the biggest chance in reducing that by using this non-emission fuel, that is green hydrogen. Also, gray hydrogen could fill that need somewhat, however, increasingly so throughout the world, be it companies and consumer organizations are looking at the entire chain. That is the emissions of the so-called 3rd range. That is not what's just the footprint of the company that produces, but what sort of emissions were imported by certain purchases. This is very important from the point of view of hydrogen. So direct emissions disappear. However, take a look at emissions from the chain. There is quite a difference between green and gray hydrogen. Now, but let's be open. I mean, we are not so much interested in hydrogen particle, but the energy connected with it. I mean, looking at it in a simple way, our production process is that we take the ore, which is initially processed, and we have to clean it from everything which is not copper to receive a product which is nearly 100% pure metal. And that requires a lot of heat for it to power our our furnaces, for example. Today we use some mostly natural gas or coke, and hydrogen can be alternative source. Of course, this is not charity. We believe that in the future the hydrogen market will increase so much that its price will be similar to natural gas, but today we are very much away from that. So in our plan we try to connect many of these topics, but we are transforming our business to maintain or to increase our competitiveness and not just to create charitable activity. This is the key difference between our business comparable to other energy companies or oil companies which have to kind of create themselves from anew. We don't have a problem here because our products are needed and are going to be more needed, but we must carry out a revolution of how we provide these products. Green hydrogen is a great carrier of thermal energy, because if we take a look at what changes should be made in industrial installations to use hydrogen instead of gas, it's not that we have to invent something from scratch. No, it's rather a question of proper material engineering, perhaps increasing pressures in installations, but it all can be done. And what we are doing now is a certain technological preparation of organization. Also, the aspect of educating people is very important. So these are the projects we see in the years to come. My department is responsible for these first types of projects, pilot projects, and I can also say that it fits very well into larger strategic plans of Poland, the Polish hydrogen strategy or sector agreement, but I'm sure we'll hear more about it later. Now a question to Piotr. Azoty Group is quite close to me because I come from Tarnowo, so I know very well the Azoty plant there, and I know that Azoty, I remember as a kid, I always heard that in the Azoty plant there is hydrogen storage, and if that hydrogen would explode, the entire city would be destroyed. I don't know to what degree it was an urban legend, but I am curious when it comes to the ambitions of the group, but from slightly different perspective, because today it has appeared in previous panels that is the issue of legislative environment, both on the EU and domestic level. I wonder, how do you assess these regulations that we have, the way this process looks in the context of the ambitions of the group when it comes to hydrogen energy transformation? Good afternoon. Thank you for the question. Thank you to the organizers for inviting me. Yes, Azoty Group, the fertilizer sector generally, has already been mentioned today and yesterday as well. Yes, the fertilizer sector is characterized by the fact that it's been using hydrogen for a long time in its installation, so it isn't anything new. True. What's new is the change in hydrogen production from gray hydrogen to green hydrogen, and here the true regulations do play a role. If we take a look at it from the perspective of creating regulations, then in a normal process, the way it is, we have certain technologies, they become available, they are economically viable, they are safe, there is appropriate personnel to service them, then they are implemented, and then regulations follow. However, this situation is not of this type, it's not ordinary. We are changing actually the whole paradigm. Now we have a situation when EU regulations, in a way, not catalyze, but in a way create or enforce creation of the entire market of green hydrogen. So paradigm changes. First we have regulations, and then technological and economic solutions follow, which thanks to these regulations are to become more profitable. And this is an important element which changes the way of thinking when we think about the new packet for 55 presented in July last year by the European Commission, or the Repower EU plans. And I think the Fit for 55 packet is an excellent element which can illustrate the type of thinking about this climate revolution, energy revolution in industry and in the energy sector, of course, because many components of this package, as the directives on taxing energy, directives, the so-called tax directive on decarbonization, which is not quite part of Fit for 55, but is closely connected with it. All of these create new, very important regulations which will impact functioning of the entire fertilizer chemical sector. And today, of course, even if we discussed it all day, we wouldn't be able to describe all the elements, all the changes which will have impact on the fertilizer sector and other energy consuming industries. An example that can be given is previously referred to is the issue of fuels of biological origin. And here I refer to the original proposal of the EU in 2020. Until 2030, such sectors should have 50% of using hydrogen in the form of renewable hydrogen. This is a huge amount because, you know, it's difficult to imagine, but let me illustrate it. I mean, what is revolution? I mean, each technological revolution looks differently, but to present what is the scale of these challenges, it's enough to say that the European Commission points that on the industrial side, investments until 2030 to carry out the goals presented in the directive in the draft from July 2021, there should be investments until 2030 in the amount of 250 billion euro in the entire EU. And here we're talking about only the industrial sector without the renewable hydrogen, without the supply side and the development of the energy network. If we add to that the supply, it's 980 billion euro until 2030. Now, these are abstract, astronomical numbers. The Polish budget for 2023, this is about 160 or 140 billion euro, 140. So if you're talking about the industrial sector, then without the supply side, we would need at least two budgets of the entire country to carry out the energy transformation in the EU. These are huge expenditures. And of course, they will play a tremendous role in the functioning in the fertilizer chemical sector, in which the ammonium production is pointed to as the sector which has the biggest potential, first of all, in lowering the consumption of natural gas and implementation of green hydrogen. That is this sector that will bear the main burden of this hydrogen revolution.
Of course, the Azoty Group, as the biggest producer of hydrogen and consumer of hydrogen in Poland, is preparing for that. And we can here point at the strategy Green Azoty, that will make it possible for us to adjust to the changes occurring. Following the Green Azoty strategy until 2030, the energy mix of the group, as far as renewables are concerned, is to amount to 40%. These are supposed to be renewables. To this, we have 15% of energy coming from a variety of instruments of circular economy. So we're talking about some changes that the Azoty Group is getting ready to absorb. And we have to mention during this conference that an ideal example of those is implementing hydrogen technologies. We can talk about zakłady azotowe, so nitrogen plants in Puławy, Kędzierzyn-Koźle, that are already taking up initiatives concerning introducing hydrogen and producing renewable hydrogen. Kędzierzyn-Koźle is an interesting example here because the nitrogen plant there may become a very important element of a hydrogen hub that is to be created around the Lower Silesia Hydrogen Valley. So you can see that the idea of hydrogen valleys again constitutes an important element of the Azoty group transformation, as it ensures coordination of works along with other stakeholders that are also interested in hydrogen economy's development. Such issues should be agreed on at the design level already within projects. So quite a revolution ahead, but we already taken up activities that are supposed to help us mitigate the risks related to it. As you've mentioned, the amounts we are talking about, what kind of investments are to be made in the time to come, and I guess that there is no doubt that when you shift to hydrogen-oriented technology, that will require a lot of investments. And now the question goes to Maria. In the light of investments in R&D, from your point of view, what would you tell us about the support programs? Do they already exist? Can the industry already benefit from any programs or expect to be able to do so pretty soon? Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for this question. Gentlemen, here speaking about hydrogen, very often used the words future, perhaps, change. And of course, these are the words that money is hidden behind. It is hard to think about changes without financial support. As a former scholar, I realized that when we study and test certain things, not always are the results that we obtain the ones that we would expect to obtain. So from a scholar's point of view, it is also something that helps you grow. That is, if your result does not meet your expectations. But from the point of view of involving resources, it can certainly be something that will disappoint you if you invest, but the effect is not spectacular and the investment does not pay back. That is where there is a slot and place for the support from all sorts of public funds. These funds are likely to help institutions in supporting innovation and studies at this stage at which they are most risky and at which involving only one's own equity, be it that of research institutes or enterprises, could mean that the changes would not occur because simply the resources might prove to be insufficient. But as recipients, as users, we would like technologies to keep on changing, and we would like them to become a cleaner, cheaper, more efficient, more readily available. But in order for this to be possible, it is necessary to have funds. Now we are in a transitory period, so it is difficult to discuss some aspects, but it is not the case that nothing is available now and there are no financing options to benefit from. I deal with the Horizont Europa, Horizon Europe program, so the biggest one for innovations, the biggest program of this kind, co-financed from the resources of the European Union, and within the National Center for R&D, we have options for you within the program that can be supportive, so please get in touch. And the hydrogen-related technology is also present within the program for the years to come. The competitions are announced well in advance. Now we are working on the contest for 2023-24. These criteria will be announced at the end of November. So we are waiting now for those criteria to be announced. They will be made public then by the end of October, and you will learn what kind of course proposals we have in 2023-24. But the topics will also arise within a big initiative by the European Commission that is Clean Hydrogen Partnership. It is a partnership that brings together also Polish entities. This is the one between the European Commission on the one hand side and European associations of hydrogen on the other. And these entities together hold contests and announce the need for carrying out studies related to hydrogen. By the end of September, some contests like so have been closed, but these were not the last ones, so they will be held at least until the end of this programming period, so 2027 or even longer, because we are not talking about something new, but about a partnership that used to exist and that also dealt with hydrogen and fuel cells. And every year this partnership has new offer, new contests, competitions. They say they have closed only recently, the current ones, but you can make sure that you take a look at what shape they had this year, because the new ones are likely to be very similar. So the problems that are touched upon and finance do not change as dynamically year to year. So looking at what was financed this year, you can expect what would be financed in the years to come. For example, this year, it is hydrogen valleys that could count on support, those on a smaller or a larger scale, but this is just one of many examples. Within this partnership, competitions are called, and in order to participate in them, you can represent any entity, a legal entity. You do not need to be a member of the partnership to participate in the projects. Now, the projects are research and innovation projects. Depending on the type of project, there are varying levels of financing, but we are talking about high financing levels because they can reach even 100% of eligible costs, depending on the topic and how close a given solution is to the market. Because in these cases in which we talk about market-related solutions, the European Commission expects that the entities involved in the project will also involve some of their own funds and would be able to market their solutions pretty well. But those that are more research-oriented, further from the market perhaps, can count on a higher share of financing from the European Union. Of course, Horizon Europe is not the only option for the financing of projects. Talks have been held with the European Commission about the funds, structural funds. Poland has its own share within those, and the first of the programs was adopted, operational programs. That will be implemented by the National Center for Research and Development, and the National Center for Research and Development is an intermediary here organizing the competitions. There will be a certain pool of resources that will be distributed through the competitions. We don't know what the subject matter is going to be, but anyhow, hydrogen is getting ever more popular, so we might expect that it will be taken into account also within this tool. With Horizon Europa, we do not have separate funds allocated to Poland, so we compete on a par with other contestants from other European countries, and the better applications we submit, the better, the greater funds we can obtain. These are centrally governed, those managed by the European Commission, as well as structural funds, where we have a particular pool of resources allocated to Poland's needs. So even if there are no open calls now, these options have been around and will be around, so it's important to write a good project and prepare a solid application. So it's really worthwhile thinking ahead so as to be able to enter in cooperation with the right partners and make it clear to evaluators that this is the project that deserves financing. Nothing else for me left for me to say to keep our fingers crossed for the financing to be made available. Listening to the discussion today, I have no doubts that there is motivation to keep investing in hydrogen. There is will. But the question arises, and that leads me to our conversation from a few days ago, because again, you participated in a number of conferences devoted to hydrogen, and it is also the feeling that you have that this motivation and will to invest in hydrogen is there, But that does not mean yet that entrepreneurs know how. And here a key question arises when we move to the stage of deciding to implement an investment. A question arises whether the entrepreneur has made the right decision in terms of analyzing all the pros and cons. Thank you very much for the invitation to this discussion and for this question. At the moment, there are increasing possibilities and technologies available in the market, or products available in the market, that make it possible for us to transfer electric energy, particularly pure electric energy, from renewable energy sources onto hydrogen or its derivatives. This fact as such is a very good and optimistic piece of information, because it allows us to think that access to the options of transforming electric energy and its storage will increase. But the questions also arise whether information that is shared by the producers of particular systems or entities that get involved in distribution or promotion of this kind of solutions give us a full picture. Do they give sufficient information for investors? Aren't they over-optimistic? Investors should approach this kind of information quite carefully, cautiously, and try to get involved some other entities that could provide an independent evaluation of some systems, technologies, and make sure that those who carry out such analyses are not commercially bound either to the manufacturers or distributors of a given technology. That's one thing. Number two, getting ready for an investment, whose capex is 7 or 8 zeros or more, it is worth looking at this kind of investment from the point of view of logistics. Are the materials indispensable for this investment or products? By materials, I mean here elements of rare areas or metals. Will they be available over the lifetime of this investment, let's say in the time horizon of, 15 to 25 years perhaps? And today we can see that something we've gotten used to, something we thought would last, is falling apart. Supply chains get broken, and the certainty concerning the supply safety has been shattered. So one has to carry out such analysis and make sure that one assesses the probability for certain occurrences to materialize themselves. Talking about design engineering, there are a few stages that precede investment decisions. So we start with research and data gathering. Then we move on to a stage in which we formulate a problem and we identify the requirements. Then we move to the stage of feasibility study. This is a stage that makes it possible for us to create a concept of the project, from which stage we move on to a preliminary project or front-end engineering or front-end engineering and design, as we call it in English, and that helps the investor to make a decision about the investment. And we should pay a lot of attention and be diligent about making sure that the information derived from this process is as broad as possible and supported with a holistic technical and financial analysis, so that the decision made by the investor is as conscious as possible. And to our mind, this process should be supported. And it should be supported with modeling and simulations of the operations of the systems related to a given investment. And when the investor makes an informed decision, we move on to the execution of the investment and the works performed to analyze the situation can be used already at the stage of the implementation when we start building a given system, be it electrolyzer or hydrogen storage. These pieces of information will prove useful and handy to verify whether the intended parameters have been met. The simulations will also be very useful in simulating and modulating and in modeling and in creating reports. I'd like to refer to the venue and place we are in. We are here in Gdynia, in a port city closely related to maritime economy. A representative of the energy sector mentioned that some time ago the regulations concerning the necessity to reduce sulfur content in fuels were this driver for taking up extensive works on the new products that would have a lower content of sulfur. Now we are in a similar moment, so it seems to me. One of the requirements specified in the Fit for 55 package, as mentioned today, the FuelEU Marine, says, this resolution says that the fuels to be used in shipbuilding need to keep on reducing their emission potential by 1% or 2%, but around mid-century this emission rate will have to be reduced by several dozen percent. It is hard to imagine, at least today, a fuel that will guarantee such a scope of reduction. It might be hydrogen or its derivatives. And this is the moment in which the industry has to take up the challenge. So it seems that there is understanding of this issue, the market, and we will simply have to face the challenge. So much from me for now, thank you. I will continue the thread of analyzing of the investment, and I will ask Jan the question, because probably you've been in this situation a number of times that you've analyzed the economic justification of various investments, and I would like to ask you about hydrogen. Could you share any particular experience, something that you could maybe tell us about and share? Yes, but if I may, I will refer to what we've heard, what we've heard also from Ms. Maria. I'm talking about legislation. We've been operating within this legislative context for some years now. There are environmental goals specified, targets specified for the industry, and we know that we add biocomponents to fuels, to petrol, so it's methanol and derivatives, and also methyl esters of fatty acids, so simply plant-based substances. And we've been through the consequences of the RED II directive, where the target was 10%. So we would have to replace 10% of the fuel, of fossil fuel, with a biocomponent. And I sadly need to admit that this goal has not been met. That was 5.5% in Poland. So actually this target was not met. We did not meet our internal regulations that, of course, transpose this directive onto our internal requirements. The present directive appears to be ambitious again in terms of the targets it sets. So I think that Fit for 55 is an attempt at thinking that these things will work, but let's be realistic. We cannot afford it. And of course, Europe would like to be at the avant-garde of the changes towards green economy. However, the costs may prove to be too high over such a short time. This is our experience, and it seems to us that certain pathologies may occur. If you invest too much, the prices go up over the top, and the costs, despite co-financing, are difficult to bear. And of course, the delivery time concerning different installation systems, projects, whatever concerns the investment. But I would like to refer to yet another thing, back to track, namely as for green hydrogen. When I listened to the contributions during the panel, I heard a few times that green hydrogen is the one from electrolysis that comes from RES, renewable energy sources, but this is not exactly the case. There are many other ways of generating green hydrogen. This is first and foremost transforming organic waste, for example, anaerobic fermentation of organic waste, like, for example, the waste that we as city dwellers or village dwellers produce on an everyday basis. This waste is separated, collected, separated, and they get to the bio plant where biogas is generated, and around 50% of its content is green methane. If this methane undergoes the process of steam or vapor reforming, the classical process for generating hydrogen, and it is used both in Azoty Group and in Orlen, then what we get is hydrogen. And it is hydrogen that is green. What is more, if we capture CO2, when this hydrogen is produced with the use of reforming, then we have negative emission following the legislation. So formally speaking, we've got negative emission. So absolutely, this is another direction that we decided to take on board, and we found some entities that process waste in big city centers, big urban centers, and we carried out a very preliminary feasibility study that tells us whether it pays off to produce hydrogen based on green biogas or green biomethane. Let me put it this way, some year ago or so, that looked really well. I mean, well from the point of view of investment expenditure, but it looked much worse in terms of its competitiveness as compared to the methane. Now the situation is quite different, so the costs of generation are now really very competitive in terms of classical methane. I mean, the price of it. But of course, the capex went up over the roof. So this combined biogas plant, biofermentation plant, then gas purification system, membranes, PSA, or any others, or SMRs. Now I'm talking about SMRs, so steam reforming. There are those on a small scale, there are big scale ones that can be used and produce hydrogen for the needs of, for example, local urban transportation entities or municipal purposes plus heat.
Sounds promising. Radosław, let me go back to your earlier words, the topic of green steel. After all, it already exists. After all, the Swedes are already producing green steel. Of course, I don't want to suggest an answer, even though I would like the green steel to be produced in Poland as quickly as possible. However, I wanted to ask you about these ambitious plans of the group in the context of seeing the biggest chance for transformation at this point. Is it the green steel, or is it something different, in fact? Well, we do not make steel. Of course, we look at the steel factor, at the steel sector. It's our older brother, a very inspiring one. It's a bigger sector than ours. We produce 22 million tons of copper, and when it comes to steel, it's like 1 billion tons or so. So huge differences here. And it's similar also in the situation that European market is very much dependent on market. So even though that we have steel and copper mills in Europe, we still import a lot, which results in the fact that the producers here in the EU have much higher regulatory requirements, and they must compete with these polluting producers who are not burdened by these costs, and they can provide cheaper energy. And they have cheaper energy as well. So we have to look for niches, and these green products, generally speaking, green products, not just steel, similar in aluminium. Similar, it's also happening on the copper market. They give us hope here. They give us hope in finding such clients who will be willing to pay a few % more to get a product with very low carbon footprint, which matters to them because that means lower emissions from the third range, that is the ones bought, imported along with the purchased product. And yes, this is already becoming a reality in these sectors, because it also looks different for steel when it comes to cost of energy, cost of emissions, and the price of products. Steel is much cheaper than copper, but has much higher emission indicator per ton. So in copper, we're definitely looking at steel, and we expect that it's going to happen in our sector too, with a bit of delay perhaps. So we are following that trend, and as the copper industry, copper sector throughout the world, we are working on a certain decarbonization master plans of lowering the emissions in the entire copper sector. Furthermore, in many sectors, there is a lot of talk about this unfair or at least not even playing field competition from China. By the way, the Chinese copper sector put its goal at 2040, which is even sooner than we think of in Europe. So it seems that their competitive edge will come from cheaper and dirtier to just better. So looking at it from this point of view, it might turn out that we will not be looking at a simple economic calculations in terms of what's the cheapest energy carrier, but we will look at where we can obtain savings on carbon print, at least in part of our production. Here we could use hydrogen as the zero emission fuel. And this definitely gives us a possibility of using hydrogen in the perspective of a dozen or so years and not decades. So that's why our company is over 6 years old after all, so we are looking at things from a long-term perspective. Of course, a lot is being said about hydrogen revolution, but let's be honest, I mean, hydrogen technologies are well known. They've been known longer than classic fuels. For 150 years we've had them. So on our own field, on our own sector, we're working on it to implement these technologies in steel production. And you mentioned green steel, so we want to use the experience of these projects that are already happening in Europe in steel. We have a lot of investment overlap R&D projects. Such projects of green mills are being created in Europe. A big green steel project Also in Belgium, we have French, German companies which want to start such installations, which have capability of 1 million tons of steel annually, where hydrogen will be used. This is very interesting, because as I've said at the beginning, I said that we need hydrogen as energy carrier, but that's not entirely true, because we also have the reduction process in metallurgy that is getting rid of the excess oxygen. And here carbon, or rather coal, has been used so far. But hydrogen can also be a solution, because it connects with oxygen, obviously, and gives us steam, right? Water steam, which makes it much easier to deal with gases, byproduct gases. You don't have to look for new complicated technologies, but simply use hydrogen instead of today's coal solutions. So we are conducting such works, and I think that if in the work sector this is going to work out, and it will give us an advantageous edge over the imported steel, and I'm sure that the EU will want to expand this model onto other sectors, which is quite important, since the steel sector was selected as the model one for decarbonization. It has its own niche in the works of the European Commission, so I'm counting on success here. Very often it's the case that the creators of technologies in steelmaking, they offer similar solutions as our sector. So we are very much interested in the effects of their work, and we hope there will also be room for some Polish content here. I do count on it, because building economy, developing economy is not just about having enough hydrogen, but also have to as much Polish technological thought as possible here. We are placing our bets on that in our company, and hopefully we'll be able to speak of such projects of ours where this Polish content will appear or will be developed. And here Maria mentioned about hydrogen partnership calls for bids, and here I can say that our company, the entire Silesian Hydrogen Valley, has started here this recruitment. We have a full hydrogen chain here on small scale, Promet, Plastel, Wadowawem, in Lower Silesia. We have an electrolyzer that's working there. We have wind turbines next to it. So we're talking about really green hydrogen, and we want to upscale it. Of course, hydrogen prices are far from optimum today, but I'm deeply convinced that the fact that we are talking about these issues, that we are creating projects, we're creating consortiums, this is going to convince other companies, other entities, and we will have this snowball effect. With the increase of scale, the unit prices will decrease. Piotr, question to you. Perhaps shifting gears a bit, because I see here that the interest in hydrogen is huge. But going back to the topic of regulation, it seems that these regulations will be of key importance to further development of projects. Do you see any regulatory challenges when it comes to these hydrogen projects so that they can happen more rapidly? Thank you, Paweł, for these challenging questions, because it should be like in cartoons. I should have these huge scrolls, never-ending scrolls, and to show you where there are no challenges. The key element that creates this challenge is the fact that legislation dealing with green hydrogen, because that's what we are talking about as part of transformation, there is very little regulation here. Because on the EU level, as part of this packet of Fit for 55, the actual rules haven't yet been specified as far as production of hydrogen, what are going to be the goals, the targets, and so on. So this impacts the legislation. It doesn't appear yet because state governments are waiting for solutions proposed by the EU. this deals with the Delegated Act, which was mentioned before, which would define what, in fact, is green hydrogen, because we are using a certain intellectual abbreviation. We're saying that we have an electrolyzer connected to renewables, then it's green hydrogen. But even if we talk about electrolyzer connected to renewables, then it's not necessarily green hydrogen yet, because it's only the Delegated Act will set the criteria defining green hydrogen. We can have situation that despite we have electrolyzer and turbine charging it, we still don't have green hydrogen because certain criteria are not met. And here we have to agree with the European Parliament, which concluded that the proposal of the European Commission may be a bit too far-reaching and maybe throwing the baby out with the bathwater, and if too many limiting criteria are introduced. So it's definitely a regulatory challenge, another challenge, regulatory challenge, which definitely is going to appear. It's the previously mentioned issue of financing. Because, of course, we have to introduce green hydrogen to limit emissions, but if we look at it from the energy safety point of view, is the ability to purchase at acceptable market price. Because if it's not acceptable from the point of view of fertilizer chemical sector, farmers will not buy fertilizers. And if they don't buy fertilizers, they'll have smaller yields, which will negatively impact food prices if they buy them at high price, connected with necessity to produce fertilizers using renewable hydrogen, which is not yet competitive. Then, in such a case, these food prices will also jump, because that price of fertilizer will end up in the price of food. So we have to remember about it, because when we speak about energy safety and hydrogen, we have to speak about food safety as well. And we also have to pay attention to the fact that in fact, depending on the exporter, on Russia, on carbohydrates, depending on it, and now being cut off from them, created this huge increase. And when we talk with the European Commission, we have to remember that we can't transform one addiction into another addiction. That is using hydrogen, green ammonia from third countries, because in bad geopolitical situation, we can also enter another crisis, but this time it's going to be a food crisis, because the green ammonia, green hydrogen is going to be cut off. Thank you. Maria, question to you. Assuming that, yes, we are going to have a hydrogen boom, are we in fact ready as far as support programs? Let's say in the perspective of the next few years, so we'll have more and more investments like that. Hopefully we'll have as many investments as mushrooms in the forest now after the rain. So are we as Poland, are we as EU ready to service that, to deal with that? I do hope so. These programs are somewhat elastic. And if new issues appear, new topics that are worth financing appear, then more financing appears, other subjects disappear. It's also important that we have to participate in it, because when we talk about European finances, European means, here Polish institutions are somewhat modest. That's why I'm happy to hear that KGHM is going to start up here. I'm keeping my thumbs crossed, and I do hope that there will be more Polish institutions, because other countries apply with greater intensity and they receive more funds. In our case, there is certain worry whether we actually have the power and energy to reach for these goals? I think we do. If we have a good idea, a good product, we should reach for those funds and not to give not give room to other states which are not necessarily better when it comes to ideas, but they simply have greater energy. They have more willingness to fight, so to speak. Let's not give up. Let's fight for financing for Polish institutions. Unfortunately, the quality of the sound is quite poor, making it difficult to interpret. But one more question to Dariusz Rudziński, perhaps to sum up today's discussion. I have a question regarding where, from your perspective, a person who looks at various investments in renewables, where do you see the biggest chance for quick transformation? And here I'm referring somewhat to the topic we've heard about today and yesterday, as the topic of offshore and energy storage. Is this in fact a direction where we should invest in most quickly? Well, last year in the beginning, we had an act in the Polish legal system on energy production from offshore farms, and according to the document, the financing or support is received by projects of 11 gigawatts, which are already being carried out and are going to be carried out for the next decade or so. So it's a potential source of energy which can be changed, at least partially, into such carriers as hydrogen. And here I'd like to point your attention to what happened in Denmark this year. The heads of the 4 states, North Sea, Denmark, Germany, Holland, and Belgium signed a declaration in which they say that until 2030, it's not that far away, the power assigned for electrolysis from offshore farms will reach at least 20 gigawatts. And in this context, investments started to happen. That is, building of these energy islands and also electrolyzers on land, 20 gigawatts. So that's quite a significant level of power. In my view, the Baltic countries and Poland will follow suit. I can also say that financial support will be given to projects of total power of 11 gigawatts, however, taking into account the marine spatial use plan and the actual density of power which should be installed in Polish economic zone. We have room here for at least a dozen or so gigawatts. So the total power in Polish offshore could be 28 to 30 gigawatts. That would be enough power to transform it, to change it into such energy carriers as hydrogen. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for this discussion. To sum things up, it seems that we can see readiness on part of the industry for this transformation. Perhaps a big revolution will have to wait for it a little bit. Hopefully, a regulatory environment will help us here. Support programs are out there. Some are waiting. Hopefully, they'll be implemented. So we're keeping our fingers crossed. Once again, thank you.
Jesteśmy największą metropolią w Polsce Północnej. Jesteśmy otwarci na to, co nowe. Jesteśmy świetnym miejscem do życia. Jesteśmy Trójmiastem i dlatego zawsze będziemy dbać bardziej.
Korki na wszystkich drogach dojazdowych do Trójmiasta już dawno przekroczyły akceptowalny poziom. Dlatego samorząd województwa pomorskiego uruchomił nową linię kolejową łączącą metropolię trójmiejską z Kaszubami. Dzięki podróży pociągiem tysiące osób może szybciej i wygodniej dojechać do pracy, szkoły lub na zakupy, a potem wrócić do domu. Nie trać czasu i pieniędzy w korkach. Podróżuj szybko i wygodnie koleją. Do pracy, do szkoły, na zakupy.